In about 24 hours, the state of Florida is set to execute Duval County inmate Michael Bernard Bell killing.
If Bell's execution is carried out, he'll become the 8th inmate put to death in Florida this year. News4JAX anchor Ashley Harding takes a closer look at capital punishment and new changes we're seeing in Florida.
It was July 15, 2025. Michael Bell sat in the death chamber, a man marked by violence, his fate sealed by the very actions he had taken years before. The room was cold, the air heavy with anticipation. As the final moments of his life ticked away, the question that had haunted him for years remained unanswered. Was he a man seeking justice, or was he simply another victim of his own rage? Bell's life had been defined by violence. In 1993, overcome with grief over the murder of his brother, he believed he had no other choice but to avenge him. His brother's death, still fresh in his mind, led him to Jimmy West, a man Bell thought was responsible. With a heart full of pain and a mind clouded by grief, Bell armed himself with an AK-47 and stormed into a Jacksonville bar, looking for retribution. In a split second, the world around him became a blur. He fired, first at West, then at anyone who was close enough. Tamecka Smith, an innocent bystander, fell with the rest. The chaos erupted. Bell's world became a storm of gunfire and screams, and in that instant 2 lives were taken. But what Bell didn't know was that his actions would forever change not only his life, but the lives of many others. The horror didn't end there. Bell didn't hesitate, he didn't care, he just kept firing. He fled the scene, his heart racing, believing his actions were justified. But in the silence that followed, a deeper truth began to settle. Was he avenging a death, or was he simply making the world more dangerous by feeding the fire of violence? As the years passed, Bell was caught and arrested, his violent past laid bare. His history was tainted by bloodshed, not just the 2 murders in 1993 but also the killings of a woman and her child in 1989. Yet the question remained, was he a man driven by a sense of justice? Or had he become nothing more than a criminal, lost in his own rage? The trial that followed became a public spectacle. His defense painted him as a man who had been pushed too far, a victim of circumstances beyond his control. But the prosecution didn't see it that way. Bell was a man who had chosen violence, who had taken justice into his own hands. As the courtroom drama unfolded, the question became clear. Was he a hero in his own eyes or simply a villain? Was his violent history a result of a broken world or was it a choice? Bell's arrest and subsequent conviction sparked fierce debate. Some felt sympathy, believing his actions were the result of his emotional turmoil and the loss of his brother. Others, however, saw him as a man who had crossed a line and deserved to face the ultimate consequence. The more they learned about Bell's past, the more divided the nation became. Could someone like him ever be redeemed? Or was this the price to pay for a life defined by violence? What do you think? Was Michael Bell's act one of justice? Or was it just the actions of a man driven to madness? Was he a product of his environment, or did he make the choice to become something else? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you're captivated by this story, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the rest of this intense journey into a case that continues to leave us questioning the true nature of justice. The trial was a spectacle, a clash between public perception and the gritty reality of the courtrooms. Michael Bell's actions in 1993 had been shocking. Gunfire that ended lives, sparked chaos, and forever changed the course of his own. But now, in the sterile confines of a courtroom, the question wasn't just about the crime itself, it was about whether Bell had been justified. Was he the product of a broken world, pushed to the edge by grief and rage, or was he a cold-blooded murderer who had made the choice to kill? Bell sat silently through most of the trial, his eyes hidden behind darkened glasses. The weight of the charges was heavy: 3 murders, a history of violence, and an emotional turmoil so deep it seemed almost impossible to understand. His defense tried to paint him as a man driven to madness by the death of his brother, someone who saw himself as the instrument of justice in an unjust world. But the prosecution wasn't buying it. They painted a different picture, one of a man who had chosen violence, who had pulled the trigger not out of justice but out of rage and revenge. The courtroom buzzed with debate as witnesses testified about Bell's violent history, his troubled childhood, and his deep, emotional scars. But there were no easy answers here. Some said Bell was simply a victim of his circumstances. His brother's death left him broken, and the justice system failed him long before he picked up that rifle. But others said Bell was a man who had made a choice, to kill, to take lives, and to create more destruction in a world that was already filled with pain. Was Michael Bell justified? This question seemed to hang in the air like a cloud of uncertainty, and the tension in the courtroom rose. It was no longer just about the murders, it was about what we, as a society, do when we face someone who has been pushed beyond the point of return. Was Bell a hero, avenging his brother's death, or was he a villain who needed to pay for his actions? The defense presented their case with passion. They painted a picture of a man who had suffered, who had been broken by loss and betrayal, and who thought his actions were the only way to restore some semblance of order in his world. But as the trial dragged on, Bell's humanity seemed to disappear with every word spoken. The focus shifted from his grief to his actions. The gunfire that had ended 2 lives and almost took others became the centerpiece of a story that could no longer be softened by sympathy. The clock was ticking and Bell's fate was drawing near. As the prosecution closed its argument, the words justice and revenge began to blur. Was Bell's quest for vengeance any different from the system he was now part of? The one that sought justice through a life taken just like his own? Was he justified in his actions, or was he simply another product of a violent world, reacting without reason? What do you think? Was Michael Bell a man lost in grief, or a man who made a calculated choice to take lives? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're intrigued by the complexity of this case, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more true crime stories that leave us questioning everything. Michael Bell's fate was sealed long before that final day. The years leading up to his execution were marked by a series of decisions that painted a clear picture of a man driven by vengeance. But the question remained, could a man so consumed by grief ever be held responsible for the destruction he caused? Or had his pain blinded him to the consequences of his actions? Bell's violent history stretched far beyond the murders of Jimmy West and Tamecka Smith. There was the 1989 killing of a woman and her child, a toddler whose life had been extinguished in the same brutal way. Then there was the murder of his mother's boyfriend. These were not crimes of passion but actions that seemed to stem from a deep, unfathomable rage, a rage that never seemed to subside no matter how much time passed. Each murder was a piece of Bell's tragic narrative, a man whose decisions only led to more destruction. At every turn, he had chosen violence, had turned to anger instead of seeking peace. His history made it hard to sympathize with him. Yet, there was a part of his story that begged for understanding, a part of him that had been shattered by the loss of his brother, the feeling of helplessness in the face of a world that never seemed to care. The night of the bar shooting was no different. It was fueled by the same rage, the same misguided need for justice. Bell didn't hesitate. He didn't think about the consequences. At that moment, he saw the man he believed had killed his brother, and he believed he had no choice but to act. But as the bullets flew, lives were destroyed, not just West's and Smith's but Bell's as well. And what came next? His arrest, his trial, his eventual conviction, was inevitable. By the time Bell was sitting on death row, his actions seemed like a distant memory to most. People had moved on, dismissed him as just another criminal, another man lost to violence. But Bell hadn't moved on. He hadn't stopped seeing his brother's face, hadn't stopped feeling the pain of a world that had turned its back on him. Could that pain ever justify the lives he took? Was it possible to separate the man from his actions, to view him as a product of his environment, rather than simply as a killer? Bell's final words, "Thank you for not letting me spend the rest of my life in prison," were simple but spoke volumes. Was this the voice of a man seeking redemption, or was it the acceptance of a fate he had known was coming for years? As the world watched, Bell's life ended. The question of justice remained unanswered. Was he the victim of his circumstances, or was he just a man who chose to kill? His death would bring no answers, only more questions. leaving the debate over his life and actions to linger long after the switch was thrown. What do you think? Was Michael Bell a man driven to take justice into his own hands, or was he just another killer who paid the ultimate price for his actions? As the clock ticked toward his execution, Michael Bell sat in his cell, the reality of his fate settling in. The world outside had moved on, but for Bell, time seemed to slow as the inevitable drew closer. His last meal was a simple one. He requested a cheeseburger, fries, and a Coke. Nothing extravagant, just the kind of meal you'd expect from a man who was about to face the end. It was a final gesture, a moment of normalcy before the end of everything. Bell's final meal was a small act of comfort in a world that had given him little. He sat quietly, the silence around him heavy. He knew what was coming. For years, he had fought to make sense of what he had done, to find a reason that justified the lives he had taken. But in the stillness of that moment, there were no answers, only the stark reality of his impending death. He had spent decades living in a system that seemed to offer no redemption. His life, filled with violent choices, had led him here to the cold confines of a death row cell, where no amount of food, no last meal, could undo the damage. His mind flashed back to the night of the shooting. His grief, his rage, the moment when he had made the decision to take justice into his own hands. That moment had defined the rest of his life. And now, in the final moments before he was to be strapped to the execution table, Bell couldn't escape the truth of it. When the guards came to escort him to the death chamber, the air was thick with tension. The walk felt long, each step carrying him closer to an uncertain end. There was no turning back now. As he was strapped into the chair, Bell's mind seemed to race, not with thoughts of vengeance, but with the realization that this was the moment of finality. He wasn't just facing the end of his life, he was facing the consequences of a lifetime filled with violence, regret, and lost opportunities. Bell's final words were brief, but they carried a weight that no amount of food could fill. "Thank you for not letting me spend the rest of my life in prison." A simple statement, but in those few words, there was so much more. An acknowledgement of his own brokenness, of the years spent behind bars, of the life he could never reclaim. It was a plea for release, a final acceptance of what was to come. The switch was thrown and Michael Bell's life came to a brutal end. His body went still, the room silent except for the hum of the machinery. His execution was over, but the questions about his life, his choices, and the justice of his death would remain unanswered. In the cold finality of the execution chamber, there was no redemption, no peace, just the haunting silence of a life lived in rage and sorrow. Was his death truly justice, or was it simply a man paying for his violent decisions? Did the system fail him, or had he failed himself? The questions lingered as they always do, leaving the world to ponder whether a man like Michael Bell could ever find redemption in the end. What do you think? Was Michael Bell a man lost to his own anger, or was he a product of a system that never gave him a chance? Was the death penalty the right answer, or did it only add to the cycle of violence? Let us know in the comments below. If you're captivated by this case, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true crime stories that challenge our views on justice and redemption.